Welcome back to Horror Recaps. Today, I will be showing you a Hong Kong horror film from 2004 titled Dumplings. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens up at the China border where a young lady, May, is seen carrying a colorful lunchbox and passing through the security check at the station. Later, she reaches her home in Hong Kong where she spills all the other food items in the box except one, which contains some orange color-like pulps. May takes it out carefully and places it on a bowl containing water. She then rinses it properly and eats it raw. The next morning, Mrs. Lee, a former TV actress, arrives at May's colony and searches for her house. After a bit of searching, she finally finds May's house and is welcomed inside. There, May asks her to predict her age to Mrs. Lee. Mrs. Lee seems hesitant but later answers that May should not be more than 30 years old. Laughing, May tells her that she is so old that everyone there calls her Aunt May. After some time, we get to know that Mrs. Lee is there to ask May to make her look younger with the help of her secret dumplings. Once she used to be a famous actor, but now her stardom has vanished and she is just a wife to a rich businessman, Mr. Lee. Through her sources she found out that Aunt May's dumplings work better than any other cosmetics to make any woman look younger. Mrs. Lee does not want to lose her beauty, as it is the only thing which keeps her husband close to her. Soon, May enters her kitchen to make the special dumplings for Mrs. Lee. She mentions that her special ingredient stops aging from inside of the human body. She prepares the dumplings with her expertise and serves it to Mrs. Lee, asking her to consume it while it is still warm. Mrs. Lee takes the first bite and spills one of the dumplings on the floor. It seems like she does not like the taste of the dumpling. May picks up the dumpling from the floor and suggests Mrs. Lee to eat the dumplings, thinking about the results it will soon bring in her skin. She also claims that her dumplings provide the effective rejuvenation that no other expensive cosmetic products can ever provide. Mrs. Lee then closes her eyes and begins consuming the dumplings. While Mrs. Lee is eating the dumplings, May sings and performs for her. In the next scene, Mr. Lee is seen swimming and flirting with the girls around. After finishing swimming, he sits beside the pool and is massaged by a lady masseuse. Mr. Lee starts touching her inappropriately and flirts with her. He then breaks an egg and eats something unusual present inside it. Mrs. Lee is looking at all this through her window and is worried about her relationship with Mr. Lee. After that, we see May entering inside a hospital and meeting with one of the doctors. The doctor then hands a box to May and also informs her that she won't be able to provide her the ingredient like she used to. The following day, Mrs. Lee again visits May to consume her dumplings. She even asks her about her special ingredient and May replies that she uses a fetus meat inside her dumplings. Mrs. Lee is surprised to know that and keeps on listening to the sounds from the kitchen while May is preparing the dumplings. Just then, May appears in front of Mrs. Lee with a fetus in her hand. Mrs. Lee gets afraid to see the fetus. Despite knowing what's inside, Mrs. Lee eats the dumplings regularly because she is so desperate to look young. In the next scene, Mr. Lee is inside a hotel room where he is being intimate with the young masseuse. At the same time, Mrs. Lee calls him and he lies to her, telling that he is busy in a business meeting. Later in the room, Mr. Lee is preparing for a business trip while Mrs. Lee asks him to stay together for their 15th anniversary. However, Mr. Lee tells her that he should leave and writes her a check with a huge amount and asks her to enjoy herself. Shortly after, Mrs. Lee visits May and after eating the dumplings, she suggests she make the dumplings softer next time. After that, she stands in front of a mirror and examines herself to find some effects of the dumplings. Mrs. Lee does not notice much changes on her skin and urges May to find some potential alternatives. Just after Mrs. Lee leaves May's apartment, a mother arrives at her door with her young daughter, Kate. The mother asks May to help her daughter as she used to be one of the best gynecologists from China. From their conversation we get to know that Kate is 5 months pregnant and her mother cannot afford the fees to treat her in the hospitals. May refuses to perform abortion on the girl as she is young and the fetus is already 5 months old. Listening to this, the mother reveals that Kate is impregnated by her own father. And this is the reason that they are unable to keep the child. On the other hand, Mrs. Lee sees the young masseuse entering inside Mr. Lee's bedroom and locking the door, putting a do not disturb card on it. Afterwards, Mrs. Lee is seen taking May to her house, which is being renovated. There, she tells her that Mr. Lee met her when she was in her 20s. Back then, he used to love her a lot, but now, he is with a young girl. May also tells her about her marriage life and how it failed. In the next scene, we can see May coming out of Kate's apartment and calling Mrs. Lee. She tells her that she should not wait long for the potential ingredient and asks her to keep calm. Soon, May starts performing the risky black market abortion on Kate. After waiting for hours, Kate's water breaks and the fetus is released. May gets really happy seeing the fetus and stores it inside her fridge. She then picks up Kate and asks her to take some rest on her couch. The next day, Mrs. Lee visits May, who promises to provide her with the best potential dumplings which will make her look much younger. After May enters her kitchen, Mrs. Lee also decides to peek into it. While she looks inside, she gets afraid to see the 5-month-old fetus, ready to be chopped for her dumplings. Frightened, Mrs. Lee runs away from the place. She reaches the streets but then starts having a realization. She thinks that in order to save her marriage, she has to get her beauty back at any cost. Hence, she returns to May's apartment. She watches May prepare the dumplings and later eats them with great interest. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lee gets a call informing her about her husband's accident and that he has broken his leg. Mrs. Lee immediately leaves to see him, but on the way she seems really happy and enjoys the fresh air. After she reaches the hotel room, she visits Mr. Lee, who finds her more beautiful than before. Mrs. Lee seduces him and they get intimate in no time. Elsewhere, young Kate and her mother are traveling to their home on a bus. Kate is bleeding because of the impractical abortion performed on her. Soon, she gets unconscious and collapses on the road and dies in her mother's arms, who blames herself for her daughter's ill condition. In the following scene, we see Mrs. Lee hosting a party for her friends, trying to flaunt her new gained beauty. But it all turns out wrong when her friends complain about some awful fish-like smell coming from her. Embarrassed, she smells herself and rushes to the bathroom. Mrs. Lee immediately calls May and inquires about the things she put inside the dumplings. She also threatens May to inform the police. Meanwhile, Mr. Lee arrives inside the room and overhears Mrs. Lee's conversation with May. May then tells her that she has put the fetus from a young girl inside it and suggests that she calm down. Having no other options left, Mrs. Lee calms herself down by watching her old TV episodes. Later that night, Mr. Lee pays a visit to May and inquires about her illegal business. May tells him that it's just a dumpling shop and asks him to get comfortable inside. She then starts preparing the dumplings for Mr. Lee while explaining to him about the merits of cannibalism and how it was celebrated in the past. She goes on to mention that in the past people used to survive famine by eating the human flesh. Human flesh was also used to cure various diseases, and how the soldiers used to celebrate their victory with the enemy's blood and meat. After she finishes cooking the dumplings, she serves it to Mr. Lee, who starts eating it with great pleasure. Meanwhile, May can be seen walking around Mr. Lee and trying to seduce him in every way possible. Shortly after Mr. Lee finishes eating the dumplings, he grabs May and the two make love. Right then, May reveals that she is in fact 60 years old and looks so young because of her dumplings. They again begin to have the intercourse but are interrupted by Mrs. Lee's call. On the call, we can hear Mrs. Lee desperately asking May for the dumplings, but May drops her call and ignores her. Right after Mr. Lee leaves May's apartment, Mrs. Lee arrives there. She pleads with May to open the door, but May does not open it. The next day, Mrs. Lee visits a doctor who suggests she remains indoors and consume nutritious foods. While inside the hospital, she notices the young masseuse with whom Mr. Lee used to spend most of the time. Later, she gets to know that the masseuse is in fact pregnant with her husband's child. Afraid of her relationship's future, she starts roaming around the roads and cries. Shortly after, she finds May inside a hair salon and begs May to provide her with the dumplings. She also tells her that money is not an issue and hands her a huge check. May, on the other hand, ignores Mrs. Lee and tells her that there are no dumplings. Furious, Mrs. Lee leaves the place. Just after she leaves, Mr. Lee calls May and asks her to meet him. In the following scene, we see two police officers hurrying towards Kate's apartment, where they find Kate's mother holding a knife and covered in blood. Soon, it is revealed that Kate's mother has in fact eliminated her husband by stabbing him, for what he did with his daughter. Knowing about this, May immediately leaves her apartment. When Mrs. Lee visits May's apartment, she finds it being raided by the police. After that, we see Mrs. Lee having a chat with the young Mr. Lee's masseuse. She reveals to Mrs. Lee that she is 5 months pregnant and Mr. Lee has promised her to pay a handsome amount if she delivers him with a healthy baby. Mrs. Lee is happy after hearing this and mentions to her that she wants her to abort the baby. In return, she offers to pay double of the amount that Mr. Lee has promised her, and the masseuse agrees to abort. Later, we can see Mrs. Lee suggesting the doctor to not use any drugs while performing the abortion, as she wants the fetus in its pure form. In the last scene, May can be seen carrying her belongings and walking on the streets while Mrs. Lee is picking up the big fetus and cutting it to pieces to prepare the dumplings for herself. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you can watch more videos like this. Thanks for watching.